Hey guys, Yankee Prepper. I'm going to make some homemade bread today, and I thought I'd pick up the camera and share this with you. It's a recipe that I picked up a couple years ago and been using ever since. It's really easy and very tasty. A little different than the first recipe I shared with you. Ironically, I picked this up while searching online on the New York Times newspaper website, and I looked for the original article and found it. And I put it in the info box below where you can actually watch a video how he makes it, and you can get the original recipe there as well. Now, the original recipe comes from Jim Leahy, which you'll see in the article below. He owns the Sullivan Street Bakery in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. And his claim to this is that this is so easy that any 4-year-old can do it. So that means all of us can do it for sure, with the exception of maybe some asshats and trolls that watch this channel. All the ingredients here are pretty basic and simple. In fact, they all come out of my food storage. This is fresh whole ground wheat, all-purpose flour. I've got some instant yeast that is expired, but I've never let that bother me. I mean, I think this expired in 2010. I've never had yeast go bad. Some water, some filtered water, of course, and some kosher salt. The Jews know food. Salt is no exception, man. I always use kosher salt. I'm also going to use this without, or bake this without my oven, because a lot of people write in and say, well, how are you going to make bread when the power's out? And I don't know how they surmise that people have survived for thousands of years and made bread, but I thought this would be a good example or a chance to show them how I would make bread if I lost power for any long period of time. So I'm going to use my what is this thing? Slipped my mind. I'm going to use my Dutch oven for this, and then I've got some measuring devices and a nice bowl. Again, I don't go nuts trying to measure everything out perfectly. I just take, a little bit of a cup of whole wheat, and then I'm going to do a cup of all-purpose flour and another cup of all-purpose flour. I'm going to do a half a teaspoon of yeast and a teaspoon and a quarter of salt. That's basically all your dry ingredients. And so by hand, you just want to make sure all this is mixed. I'm using even a spatula or a fork. Just make sure your hands are clean. Mix it all up. Now when that's all thoroughly mixed, the dry ingredients are mixed, 1.5 cups of water, and I like to heat it up. You don't have to, the recipe doesn't call for it, but I just think it activates the yeast quicker. Just dump that in. You don't have to go nuts with it, but quickly just mix it up. And it's not going to be a dry dough, it'll be kind of a sloppy dough. Done, that's what it'll look like, and you'll definitely need a scraper on the side to get it off your fingers. That's how sticky it is. Now if you're using all white flour like the original recipe calls for, it'll still be just this sticky, and the end result will actually be a lighter bread. I like a heavier bread, so I always add the whole wheat to it. Now I'll actually make this, it's so quick obviously, I'll just make this with a cup of coffee before anybody even gets up in the morning. And you can do two things at this point. You can put it in a Ziploc or wrap it up in saran wrap, put it in your freezer, because it will freeze well, and then you can take it out when you need it. Or, like I'm going to do now, leave it in the bowl, put some saran wrap on it, and let's stick it in a warm place. And here's the catch to this bread. You have to let it sit for at least 12 hours, because you're going to let the yeast do all the work for you. You're not going to need this at all. I'm going to show you where I stick it, because it's got to be kind of in a warm place. And I always leave it for all day and overnight, so almost 24 hours. I've got a nice advantage here, because I've got a boiler room that during the wintertime is generally about 80 degrees. It's a very small room where the hot water heater and the boiler sits, and so this is a real good place to let my bread rise during that time. It's also a great place, sorry for the shadow, to start seedlings. Like I've got 60 tomato plants coming up here. Again, they don't need sunlight at this stage, they just need warmth, and I have a lot of luck hatching those. So I use it for a lot of things, including bread making. the next morning. And what you'll have is a real gooey dough. You'll kind of see pockets of air bubbles on top. It'll be speckled with them, and it'll run. That's the gluten at work there. That's what it'll look like. It's a high moisture content dough. And I prepared my breadboard by putting down a cloth and then permeating it with flour, and then I've sprinkled some sesame seeds as well. I like sesame seeds on my bread. And I've got my container of cornbread ready for the other side. So let's get this out onto the deck here. You don't want to dry this out by adding a ton of flour, but you want to coat it so you can at least work with it. Like that. Into a ball. Alright, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to pat it down just lightly. You don't want to work it. You don't want to push all and break all those air bubbles in there. You just want to pat it down. Maybe coat it with a little more flour. And then fold it over. Fold it over again. Fold it over again, and one more time, and that's it. That's going to be the bottom. So I'm going to sprinkle a little more flour, and then that's where I'm going to use that cornmeal. You don't have to use the cornmeal. I just like to do it, I think, for old time's sake or something. All right. And there's your bread dough. That's ready to go in the fire. Take your bread dough, plop it in, just drop it right in. We want a lot of high heat, so I've had this in here for a while to warm up. And we're looking at 450 to 500 degrees. Okay, keep it sealed up, and we'll cook it for about 20 to 30 minutes, and we'll have to turn it around a couple times during that cooking time. Now is a good time. Actually, you've got the bowl out. You don't have to clean that out. You can make another dough while that's cooking. And this can go downstairs and sit overnight again, so you can make fresh bread again in the morning. And it's more like a rhythm. And I won't do it all the time, but I'll get on it for a couple weeks at a time, and then I'll go back to the other recipe. It's just a different way of doing things. And baking bread is one of the best ways to save your family money and feed them well at the same time. It's a great skill, just as important as preserving your foods. I think baking bread has got to be one of those foundational skills. And you just get into a rhythm with it. It works out. It's a pretty easy thing to do. I like to leave it uncovered for a little bit before I take it out, even though it'll brown on the inside of that Dutch oven, I like it to get a little crispy on top. Let that cool off for a while. Anyway, that's my no-knead bread recipe, and I've already got my other loaf on the way tomorrow. I'll put that back down in the boiler room, and I actually probably bring the girls in on that on Saturday morning. They like to bake bread as well. So it's a real easy recipe. You don't have to knead it again. You don't have to do anything. You just put it together, leave it downstairs, and bake it in the morning. And I don't have to do this, but it really improves the quality of life of my family. We all enjoy it, and it's one of the best skills you can learn. And of course, working, it takes a little practice to work with a Dutch oven, but that's the oven that I'll be using when my main oven doesn't work. And it's good practice all around. You could shut off the electricity, you could shut off the incoming food, and I could live comfortably for a long time. In fact, I don't know how much of an inconvenience it would really be if we were all home together here. And it's a good feeling. Prepping is a good feeling. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. I'm going to let this cool off and chow down.